Moving on to the Decca label. Now, Decca is one of my favorite labels, maybe my favorite if I had to pick just one. I've been buying their records since I was a teenager and ever after. They're great sounding records. They did not, to my knowledge, record in quadraphonic, but they sound phenomenal with a superb roster of engineers and artists. And I make no apology for picking a bunch of records conducted and composed by Benjamin Britten. These are superb sounding records. And of all the records I'm showing in these videos, this is the complete no-brainer. And I can't believe it's never been reissued before. This is the later 70s pairing of two of his seminal recordings, The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, which gives a wonderful musical guide to all the instruments in the orchestra working through each section and then bringing them all together at the end in a stunning fugue. And then you've got his exquisite piece for strings only, the Variations on a Theme of Frank Bridge, which is full of pastiches of different musical styles and forms. Now, these two recordings originally came out wideband pressings, differently coupled. Here we have the Variations on a Theme of Frank Bridge coupled with his song cycle, Les Illuminations, pardon my French, and then the Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra was coupled with the Serenade for Tenor, Horn and Strings, one of the great song cycles ever written. But to get them recoupled together, as in that later Decca reissue, would be the way to go. AAA mastered, that would sound sensational. Initially, Britten was very reluctant to conduct anything. He was persuaded by the producer John Culshaw to start recording his own works, and those are all definitive or near definitive performances and certainly reference recordings that you must hear, all beautifully recorded. But gradually he started to record other composers. All of them are worth getting. Here is one of my favorites. This is a coupling of two Mozart symphonies, recorded in 1970 and 71, I think, recorded by the great Kenneth Wilkinson at the Maltings Concert Hall in Snape. And the sound on these is incredible. This record came out after Britten's death. He died in 1976. He had a heart condition. He died fairly young. I actually visited his gravesite, and I even have a letter from him. I wrote to him a few years before his death. I'd been to a concert by Peter Pears and Ossian Ellis, and I wanted to write a fan note, and Peter Pears said, yeah, go ahead, Ben would love that. And he wrote me a little letter back. It's really lovely. Anyway, this is just a fantastic record. As you can see, it won the Grammophon Music Award in 1978. Obviously, when this was released, it came out as a narrowband pressing, no tubes in the mastering chain. But imagine having this reissued with a mastering chain with tubes in it. That would be amazing. Another lesser known Britten record is this one of his ballet, The Prince of the Pagodas. Came out on Ace of Diamonds, which was normally Decca's budget label. But this is an acknowledged audiophile classic, beautifully recorded, stunning orchestration, very accessible music. How wonderful it would be to have this reissued. One of Decca's regular recording artists over the years was Georg Solti, the great Hungarian conductor, but it's worth diving back into his early catalogue for some of his best recordings. And I love the series of 3 Beethoven symphonies he did with the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. These are just suffused with that period Vienna Philharmonic sound recorded in the Sophiensaal, and these 3 recordings are superb. And this is actually my favorite recording of the Eroica Symphony, and I have here an original wideband pressing, but you can pick up the London equivalent for much less money. I got this years and years ago. I love this recording of Eroica. It's my favorite. And here's another Solti record, early one, which is not so well known, working with the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra, and these are really terrific performances. This is again a wideband pressing. Now, this is a somewhat brighter recording. My system, it's fine because my system is all tube. So obviously, if you were to remaster this, you might want to tame some of the brightness of it. I don't know if that would be possible or desirable, but this is a great record. And there's Misty clamoring for attention. So this is what my cat is demanding. She likes to go outside. And she likes to go to these plants. And she wants to be able to have some water to drink. So now I have to go and get some water. And here we go. Now she's happy, so she can drink some water from the plants and from the floor. It's hysterical. Back to the video. Moving into the 1970s, the series of albums recorded by Zubin Mehta with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra in UCLA's Royce Hall are acknowledged audiophile classics. This is a stunning recording. This was my introduction to Strauss's huge epic tone poem. This is going to give your stereo a real workout, and gosh, to have this in a AAA reissue, that would be marvelous. I have so many incredible Decca records from the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s. A lot of their digital records don't sound too bad at all, and this can sound pretty good, like for example the Dutoit Ravel Daphnis and Chloe. But I thought, okay, I'll just pick out a couple of rarities, and these are two chamber music records done by the Janacek Quartet. Not such well-known music, but absolutely exquisite. And these early pressings, these are both wideband pressings, they sound wonderful. This one of the Dvorak string quartets, and then of Haydn quartets. I've become such a Haydn fiend in later life, and I love these recordings. They have such a different quality because these are Czech players. It's just a slightly different sound world, and I love these records. Continuing with some Decca adjacent records. These are records on associated labels with Decca using similar, sometimes overlapping engineering staff, all having excellent sound. This is another record along with that Britain Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra that I would have right at the top of my list for audiophile reissue. This is stunning string sound. Michael Tippett was a slightly older contemporary of Britain. His music, at least later years, was perhaps a little harder to get into, but these early works are extravagantly gorgeous, beautiful string sound, very accessible. The middle movement of the Concerto for Double String Orchestra is one of the most beautiful things you will have ever heard in your life. These are stunning recordings. There are two cover versions of this. This is the copy which has a still from the film Aikenfield, directed by Peter Hall. The music was used in that film. And then on the other version, it's a slightly more modern, abstract cover. All those wonderful records by Neville Marriner, the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. Some of them have been reissued on different labels. They're all fantastic. Even, the originals are terrific. But to get those AAA reissues, oh, that would be amazing. A choir which Decca Argo recorded constantly was the choir of St. John's College, Cambridge. And it's a very different sound to the choir of King's College It's a slightly more robust European sound. The trebles were encouraged to use vibrato. I could have picked so many of their records. I mean, these are perfect records to introduce yourself to the English collegiate choral sound. But I picked this one because it's slightly unusual repertoire. There's another record I adore of them doing Poulenc sacred music. This treble soloist in that actually came and sang in my school choir after he left John's cathedral choir school. But this is a wonderful selection, and you've got some Duraflé, you've got Fauré, Poulenc, but the real gem for me here is the Messiaen au Sacrum Convivium. I used to sing this in school. It's one of my favorite short choral works. It's absolutely exquisite. Modern harmonies, but just not inaccessible, just quite unique sound. Look that one up on YouTube. It's a beautiful piece. Another Decca associated label was L'Oiseau Lyre, as you can see here, and later on they became most closely associated with the early music historically informed period instrument performance movement, in particular the Academy of Ancient Music records. But they also did some very interesting modern music, and this is one of the best. This is the great Japanese percussionist Tomoe Yamashita doing 3 pieces by great mid-20th century composers, German Henze, Peter Maxwell Davis, and the great Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu, whose music I love and I think is very accessible. This is a great set. It's got all these wonderful notes and photos. Yeah, to have this reissued. Often percussion records are very beloved by audiophiles, and this is one of the best. This would just thrive in a AAA treatment. The other label, which was closely affiliated with Decca, was Lyrita, which concentrated on English music, and this is one of their very best. This is music by Gustav Holst, who composed The Planets, and it's less well-known music, but it's beautifully performed and recorded. All of these pieces are quite lovely. There's another record from Lyrita which has long been considered an audiophile classic, which I do not possess, which I would love to possess, and it's this one for Malcolm Arnold, English Dances. Well worth seeking out, but gosh, to get this in a AAA reissue would be fantastic. I thought I'd throw in a couple of records from the Philips label. Philips, now part of Universal and sort of subsumed into Decca, not really considered an audiophile label, but actually many of their recordings are really fine, and I do wonder if the master tapes have more bass on them, for example, than we hear on the records, and that being remastered by someone like Emil Berliner Studios would reveal some of the extra sonic glory that may lurk on these recordings. Here are 2 of my favorites. I love the chamber music of Stravinsky, in particular the wind music, and this is one of the best records out there of that kind of music. There's also a really good one on Deutsche Grammophon with the Boston Symphony Orchestra chamber players. I hope that might get a original source re-release. But this one is really splendid, and the Netherlands Wind Ensemble was one of the best ensembles of its time and type, and all their records are terrific, but this is one of my favorites. And this is simply one of the most beautiful recordings of Debussy you're ever going to hear. Even in its OG version, imagine what it might sound like revitalized by Emil Berliner Studios or someone else like that. This is of the Debussy Trois Nocturnes and Jeux, has a choir in it. Fantastic luminous recording by Bernard Haitink and the Concertgebouw. This is one of the best records in his catalog, and it is one of my favorite Debussy records, hands down. Oh, to have this reissued and given extra sonic life, that would be amazing. In conclusion, a group of records from other labels, and there's some really interesting stuff in here. Beginning with some records from Columbia, CBS, and these were recorded in quadraphonic sound. Now, whether they were recorded with just ambient mics in the hall or with instruments in dedicated 4 channels, I don't know. But some of these have been reissued on CD, SACD by Dutton. But again, imagine getting these with the EBS treatment. It would be amazing, because frankly, the CBS pressings, especially from the 70s, are really not that great. But here we have some fantastic Pierre Boulez. This is his recording of a complete ballet of Bartók's Miraculous Mandarin, and this is hands down, I think, the best recording there is. Better than his later recording on Deutsche Grammophon. This is just phenomenal. To have this plus the dance suite on AAA vinyl, oh my god, this would be amazing. Here's another great Boulez recording, and this was one of a group of his recordings which were actually in-house reissued on audiophile vinyl by CBS itself back in the day, as you can see, half-speed mastered, and I believe these were done all analog, without digital. All I can say is that this record sounds amazing and actually gives the famous Mercury version with Dorati a run for its money. I love this performance, I love the sound. It's typical Boulez, clarity, letting all the details come out, but letting rip when he needs to let rip. I think he was an amazing conductor of other people's music, an amazing musician. I saw him live many times and he was always thrilling. This is a great, great record. And here's a record Boulez did. Oh my God. I remember buying this record and putting it on in my teens and just being blown away. This is of music by the composer Varese, very modern, tons of percussion. There's a famous Decca recording of some of this music done by Zubin Mehta, but I really like these performances, and I can only imagine if these were mastered directly from the master tapes. Oh my God, this would sound amazing and take the roof off. Now, of course, we all know RCA from the great living stereo records of the late 50s and 60s, amongst the very best sounding records ever recorded, released, I mean, exquisite, and many reissued. But later on, RCA recordings suffered tremendously from poor quality pressings on bad vinyl, and these records are really not very good, to be avoided in the used bins. But as a series of CD reissue box sets are coming out, we're learning that the sound on the original tapes, as with the Columbia records, is actually very, very good indeed. And this is one of my favorite records on the RCA label. This is Tashi, which was a chamber group led by Peter Serkin, who was the son of the great pianist Rudolf Serkin. And this is their recording doing Messiaen's seminal Quartet for the End of Time, written for this very unusual instrumentation, written and first performed while Messiaen himself was in a concentration camp in World War II. I love this piece. It's one of my favorite pieces of chamber music, and this is probably my favorite recording, along with the Barenboim actually on Deutsche Grammophon, and there's also a very good EMI recording from back in the day. I can't remember the players on that off the top of my head, but I recently got the Peter Serkin box set containing all his recordings, and this particular recording comes up sounding really wonderful. So I can only imagine what a AAA vinyl release would do for it. Now we're getting into a really favorite area of mine, film music, and in particular the RCA series of classic film scores recorded in the 70s. Charles Gerhardt conducting the great London Scratch Orchestra, National Philharmonic Orchestra, containing many of the best players from London, engineered by Kenneth Wilkinson. All these records are sensational. But I've picked out two of my favorites, which must get a reissue. This one of music by Bernard Herrmann has actually been slated for reissue on ORG, the double 45 reissue series. They've done a bunch of Londons and Deccas beautifully. It's been on that list for reissue for about 10 years at this point, I think. But how great would it be to get this done now? This is a phenomenal sounding record, some of the best solo soprano sound I've ever heard. Kirite Kanawa singing the famous aria in Citizen Kane, and unlike in the film, singing it properly. And then there's a mini piano concerto, which the sound is again phenomenal. And it being Bernard Herrmann, the other pieces, some very unusual orchestrations with weird percussion instruments, uses strings and harps. This is a stunning record. The other record from the RCA classic film series that I would love to see reissued is a fairly late release in the series. This is of music from John Williams' Close Encounters and Star Wars. And as I am sure you know, there were many cover versions of this music. It was so popular, but I think this is the best. I think this is better even than the famous Zubin Mehta Los Angeles Philharmonic orchestra collection on Decca, London. And one of the reasons I think this is so good is that the selection from Close Encounters includes basically the last 20 minutes of music from the film, you know, when the mothership comes down and he goes into the mothership and takes off. And it includes some of John Williams's most experimental music, as well as some of his most melodic and searingly emotional. This is a fantastic recording. Now, unfortunately, because it's later, it's very, very hard to find clean pressings. In fact, I've tried British pressings, American pressings. Here's even a Japanese pressing. The trouble with the Japanese pressing is it's clearly made from a dupe of a master tape. It's much quieter on the vinyl, but it's simply not as bright and exciting and full of all the detail as the English and American versions. But finding a clean copy, very difficult. I think I've got about 4 or 5 of these. I think I've got one that's pretty clean. So again, to have this on pristine new vinyl, that would be amazing. Here's a record that was actually reissued by Chesky, which was one of the first labels to do audiophile quality reissues of classical music. But unusually, this record had not been on living stereo. It was a later recording, came out on very so-so vinyl. So it was really great to have it in this much better quality pressing. And this is of Brahms's 4th Symphony, conducted by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, which is one of the 5 great London orchestras. It was actually started by Sir Thomas Beecham. And one of my teachers, my viola da gamba teacher, he played in the orchestra. It was in the 80s. Anyway, this recording is phenomenal. To have Fritz Reiner doing this piece, it's quite fast, full of energy, really worth getting. You can find pressings of this, but again, to have this in pristine new vinyl, that would be amazing. Here's a record you may not have come across. This was on Enigma. This was a British label started by John Boyden, and John Boyden had made his mark on a budget EMI label called Music for Pleasure, and then he went off and started off his own label. And this is the most exquisite recording of 2 of Stravinsky's lesser-known ballets. In particular, the Apollo Musagette, which is for strings, is very accessible. And interestingly, this is an early recording by Tony Faulkner, who went on to be one of the great British engineers going through the 80s, 90s, noughts. His recordings, he did a lot of work for Hyperion, always worth seeking out. But this is a beautiful, beautiful all analog recording. And gosh, to have this in a AAA reissue, that would be splendid. I'm going to finish with a couple of titles I would love to see reissued from the Mercury Living Presence label. Mercury was absolutely one of the greatest sounding classical labels of the late 50s, 60s. And there have been, as I said in my articles, there have been some very fine AAA reissues of their catalog done by Classic Records, some done by Analog Productions, some done by Speaker's Corner. However, in recent years, Mercury itself, the label, has been reissuing some titles, but reissuing them from digital files, which makes absolutely no sense at all. I'm pretty sure these tapes are in good enough condition that they can master directly from the analog master tape. So why aren't they doing that? It's such a shame. I hope they will reconsider, looking at the example of Deutsche Grammophon's original source series. Anyway, I picked out 2 of my favorite titles I would love to see get a reissue. This one of the Cacciatore and Gaiani Ballet, which is such colorful orchestral music, includes the famous saber dance, but it's actually other pieces in the suite which I love in particular. And then you've got Tchaikovsky's famous overture, Romeo and Juliet. Anatol Dorati was one of the great conductors who worked steadily for Mercury, and he did one superb recording after another. And incidentally, Mercury has done very good box sets of their past catalog, working with Eloquence Classics, who do some of the best classical CD reissues. And they've done a lot of the Dorati catalog. One set I would particularly recommend is a smaller set of his earlier Haydn and Mozart recordings. I think the recordings of the Haydn symphonies are much more energized and exciting than his later sets of the complete symphonies for Decca. Anyway, all the Dorati recordings on Mercury are worth seeking out. And here's another one. Yes, so I haven't really included any Baroque music. Not quite sure how that happened, but it did happen. But this is a splendid set. Now, this is not strictly Baroque. It's rearrangements by Harty of these pieces for a bigger orchestra. But these are performed with such flair and vigor. There's nothing stodgy about them at all, unlike some of the early Baroque recordings of people like Otto Klemperer, even Karl Richter, early recordings. But this is fantastic. Gorgeous sound. This would be a bestseller if they would reissue it. It would just fly off the shelves. It's never been done, I believe. So please, Mercury, get your act together, go into your vaults, get hold of the original analog master tapes, find a good mastering engineer, and do this amazing catalog properly. That would be fantastic. We would love you for it. Well, there we go. There's some serious food for thought. And actually, if you can't bear to wait, you can go and pick up a lot of those records, either in their original versions, or a couple of them have been reissued, as I think I mentioned as I went along, but some of them also in reissues on the same label sound very, very good, and you can save money that way. But gosh, wouldn't it be great if they were all reissued by the labels, by Decca, by Philips, by Sony Columbia, by RCA, by all these labels I've mentioned, Mercury, for example, EMI. Wouldn't it be great to have these all reissued, directly cut and mastered from your master tapes? I mean, that would be amazing. Done by engineers like Ryan K. Smith or Emil Berliner Studios, Rainer Meyert and Sidney Mayer, or any of the other great mastering engineers. Please, not Abbey Road. Please, no. They seem to ruin everything they touch, and they only master from digital files. So please, if you're watching this, if you're in one of these record companies, if you're hesitating to go the full AAA audiophile route, it's really worth it. Go down to a good dealership, listen to a really well-cut AAA record on a good system, and you will hear what we're all going on about. It's really worth taking the time, putting the money in. Deutsche Grammophon has done it, and they're making money off these releases, and there are many more coming, and there are some really exciting ones. I know about some of the ones that are coming. I can't share them yet, but it's exciting. There'll be some reviews coming up on this channel of the latest batch of Deutsche Grammophon original source releases. They're coming out at the end of this week. I will be reviewing them. My colleague Michael Johnson will be reviewing them on trackingangle.com. Be sure to check out those reviews. Stay tuned. And I've also got another really fun video coming your way in a few weeks. It's going to be different and it's kind of fun. Okay, see you soon. Happy listening. Good night.